What's going on, everybody? Jacob Myers from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast here, and thank y'all for joining us for another episode. Andrew's actually out on this episode. He may join us a little bit later on, but right now we've got our buddy Shane Parker on to join us, talk a little bit of turkey hunting, but also kind of comparing some turkey hunting and his passion for it compared to his passion for whitetails as well. So, Shane, how you doing?
Oh, doing good, man. How y'all doing?
Doing well, doing well. I'm doing well. Andrew's out doing errands right now, so he's preparing
Yeah.
for a birthday party for his daughter Piper, who just turned one, having a big family get together for tomorrow. So he's doing some last minute errands doing that. But Shane, super excited to have you on the podcast. It's kind of fun to get you on here because we were talking about doing a turkey episode, kind of maybe I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. But now it's good to get you on because I've kind of hunted with you a little bit I hunted with you opening day of public land season and kind of been going back and forth on, how everything's going for you, how everything's been going for us as well. And it's been pretty interesting so far. But Shane, to kick us off, I know a lot of our listeners are probably pretty familiar with you. You've been on the show quite a bit, but I don't think we've really ever done a turkey specific episode. It's always deer hunting specific on the podcast with you. So, off the bat, I do want to know, how did you get into turkey hunting? Like, how old were you, and kind of what was it like back then? And what was like your mentorship like? Did you have someone to kind of teach you turkey hunting, or was it more self-taught?
It was a combination, but I started out when I was 11 years old. So I took it up on my own. No, I didn't know anybody when I grew up that turkey hunted other than my granddad when he was younger, but they didn't do it anymore. So I don't know really how the passion started for me, except where I grew up was a hotbed of kind of turkey hunting over the years. So it was just something that always appealed to me during the spring when I'd go out and be in the backyard before school or sitting at the school bus stop waiting on the bus to pick me up, and I'd hear birds gobbling all around. So I think it was just that kind of got me going, and I started. I remember when I was probably like 9, I joined a book. It's a magazine. It was called Turkey and Turkey Hunting, and this is before I ever started hunting on my own. So I was like 9 years old. I'd gotten a single shot 20 gauge Harrington and Richardson that my dad had got me, and I said, I'm gonna try to learn this, and so where I lived, I didn't have any neighbors. I'm kind of isolated, so I didn't have much else to do but spend time in the woods. So at like 11, my parents finally like, you could, we feel comfortable enough that you can go on our property here close by and hunt, but you can't go far away from home or anything like that. So I remember my first hunt when I was 11 years old, and I took my first bird when I was 12. And then it was 5 years before I took another one. So it was like 5 years of learning, you know, how to fail a lot before I finally killed another bird. But first bird I took was on a little field that my right below my grandparents' house, and I remember those birds would come in that field because that my grandparents had planted some like turnips and rutabagas and stuff like that during the winter, and a lot of those would rot, and those birds would get in those rutabagas and those turnips and dig for the worms that were underneath it in the spring. So I basically just sat on that field for like 5 days during my spring break, and I remember on a Friday, finally a big old gobbler came strolling through there, and I was tucked up into a cedar tree, and I shot that bird at like 20 yards, and that was my first turkey. And like I said, it's 5 years before I finally took another one, and that one I always grew up during that period of time that I was learning. It was a lot of Ben Rogers Lee, his videos. He was, I guess, without a personal mentor, he was just somebody that I really looked up to and paid attention to his videos. And I had every every VHS cassette tape back then that he was on, and I would go to all the turkey calling competitions and listen to the people and read books and magazines, 10th Legion, things like that. And then when I started deer hunting, I had the guys that I did kind of taught me how to deer hunt. They also turkey hunted, and that's kind of where it really just kind of took off from that point.
So you killed your first bird, and it took you 5 years to kill your second bird. I am curious because I'll be honest, mine was very similar to that. Killed my first bird, and then it took about 5 years or so to kill the second one. Let me ask, kind of looking back, because we have a lot of people that listen to the podcast, listen to turkey episodes, that have a wide range of backgrounds. Some are brand new turkey hunters, just their very first spring. Some guys might be turkey hunting; they might have been turkey hunting for 45 years. Okay, but we get a lot of questions from the new guys and girls that are trying to get into turkey hunting and trying to explain. A lot of times they ask about like failures, like how to overcome failures, and they want to learn different things in calling sequences and how to handle different situations. And from what I've experienced, is like you can talk to a lot of people, but a lot of it's you got to learn it on your own, as in like how to handle those different situations, because it's not necessarily like maybe you have a mentor or someone you talk to, but they don't hunt with you, and they can kind of tell you how they would have handled that situation, but they weren't necessarily there. So in that 5 year range, what were some of those big mistakes you made as a kid to be able to overcome in order to start having more success later on, as you get into your late teens and into your 20s?
Goodness, I mean, the biggest thing that I kind of learned back then, and was just the patience aspect. Like, I was not patient from that point on. Like, 12 years old, 13, 14, 15 on up till I finally killed another one. I was just not a patient hunter. And it wasn't until I really just kind of picked up on that. Hey, you got to be a little more patient to do this, and not be trying to see what's over that ridge, or trying to move on a bird, stuff like that. That was the biggest thing that was causing me not to be successful as a young. And I think that's an issue that a lot of young hunters have. And a lot of new hunters have, is just that learning that real dedication to patience. And it's hard for me even now as an experienced hunter, because and I don't know near as much as most guys that have been doing this for 50 or 60 years, that have it down to an art. I'm not there to that point. I'm trying to get to that point, but it's that patience that really you have to hone that skill if you really want to jump from struggling to take a bird every year to being consistently a killer.
And speak about patience, because I had a really good experience with that this morning, hunting some public. Again, I was going to come hunt up with you, and ended up set my alarm clock at the wrong time, woke up later than I should have, and I was not going to make it, so I decided to go hit some other public. And I actually went in on where I got on a bird yesterday, which we'll talk about on Thursday's episode. But this turkey did not want to gobble. He didn't gobble on the roost at all. And with my past experience hunting there last year and how the birds typically work the area, I knew there was like a very small area, probably like no more than like 100 acres that they really like to stay in. And this is something that I don't feel like I'm a very good running gun turkey hunter. Like, I'm still like, like everybody, learning to be a better turkey hunter. But like running gunning, I feel like I struggle. Like, I feel like I miss a lot of birds, like especially those turkeys that like aren't necessarily fired up, but they may be killable if you set up in the right position and do some soft calling. And I slowly, methodically worked my way up, and specifically staying away from a specific drainage that this specific turkey was in the day before, and he like stayed down there. Like, once he got off the ridge, and I kind of missed an opportunity at being able to try to kill him, he didn't want to leave that bottom, and I stayed away from it yesterday. I didn't get so close to bump him out of it. Today I went in after I didn't hear anything after fly down, stayed in a spot till about 8 o'clock. I slowly worked at paralleling that bottom, and ended up striking that bird up out of that bottom at like 950. And me in the past, like 4 years ago, I would have just kept walking and just like try to like go to, a completely, try to put 3, 4, 5 miles on, and really, without knowing that area, would have walked myself out of turkeys. Like, those turkeys seem to be in a very specific spot. And I feel like that's part of the patience games. It's not so much like just always setting up and sitting on a bird for super long, but also understanding where the turkeys are at, and not necessarily walking out of there and just staying patient in that area until one of those birds gets fired up. in order to kind of, set up on a bird, whether it's the one that you've been trying to hunt or maybe one you strike one in that same little area, 2 hours later, but kind of staying in that spot where the turkeys are at and not necessarily walking out of it in order because, you feel a little flustered. It wasn't a great morning and you decide to hike back to the truck because that did cross my mind this morning. There was a point at about 8:30. I'm like, dude, it's cold, it's windy, and the turkeys aren't talking. This is miserable. I'm about to go bounce to another spot, but I'm like, I'm just going to hang out in this area. So when it comes to like that part of the patience, what is your understanding there? Because you had some really good points when I came and hunted it with you on Monday. And when I say hunted with you, we didn't sit together, but we were hunting like a general area together, about staying patient on some of the high ground and not necessarily get rushed into chasing turkeys.
Yeah, that's exactly what I told you. When I say patience, it doesn't mean you're sitting in the same spot because like a lot of guys consider it that like I'm gonna get somewhere that when they say patient, they mean you sit at a tree and you don't move from that tree, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Um, when I'm patient, I'm if I've got turkeys around me, I'm not gonna leave that area, or if I know they're in that area, I'm not going to leave that area to go somewhere that I don't know has turkeys or that I think has turkeys. I'm going to hang out there. But when I say patient, that doesn't mean you're just stuck to one tree. Um, I've never been in the woods and heard a hen that just stayed in one place. Gobblers will hang out in one spot and just hang out, but hens are moving. They're constantly kind of moving around. So you want to sound, patience. Also, you want to sound like a turkey. You want to put yourself where a hen's going to be. And I told you, like, if you hear a bird, and he doesn't seem quite as fired up as you'd want him to, but there's one on the next ridge. Just be careful. If you chase that bird, that the one you were calling to will end up right back where you are, because we had already experienced that. Me and Michael Pike, a couple of days before, we had kind of pushed the envelope a little bit, and both days, if we would have just hung tight to where we were and not moved, we'd probably kill birds both days. And so it already bit me in the butt, prior to that. So it was just reiterating that, and I have to reiterate that to myself as well. As like, hey, if you believe the place is good, you're hearing birds, there's no sense in chasing something that could be a ghost. If that bird answers you, like we had a lot of issues the past couple of days of you call to a bird, you hear him gobble, you call to him, and he may be 300 or 400 yards away, and it may be a 5, 6, 7, 8 second delay before he gobbles back to you. Well, that tells you that bird's not really fired up, but he's interested. So it's reading that temperature of what that bird's doing and saying, okay, well, he's not fired up right now. But in that situation, I like to do a little bit of what I call yo-yo calling. And that's where I basically, if I'm in a spot and I call to a bird to say 300 yards away, and I did this with the bird that we hunted with on Monday in that same area, and I almost killed him. I should have killed him. But I yo-yo called him, and he broke right to me. And by yo-yo, I mean I may have reached out to that bird. He gobbled back, but he wasn't real hot. And he's still standing in that same position. I've called to him a little bit. He's not really, he's not hitting the call, but he's responding, or he's gobbling on his own. And I slowly worked my way toward him, directly toward him, keeping the terrain where you're hidden. And I cut about half the distance to him. And then I'll call to him, and if he responds, then I walk back the way I came. But I don't walk back the same track. I'm taking an angle back, so I'm almost like a yo-yo. And if you do that enough with a bird, like it may take you 3 or 4 times of doing that, but that yo-yo calling on those type of birds, it's just that patience of just working that bird, because he's interested or he wouldn't reply back. It just may take him a little nudging to get him to doing that. And a lot of times when you get those birds like that, the same thing today, I missed that bird. I yo-yo called him, and he wasn't really interested, but as soon as I started doing that, it was like it just drove him crazy, And so it's just patience like that. You don't have to sit stationary. but learn the little nuances that can get that bird to come into you rather than just sitting there playing the patience game. And then when you're just tired of that, you just bug out and you're gone to the next ridge, and that bird ends up right back where you were 40 minutes, later.
So I'm really interested now in this calling strategy because I haven't necessarily heard. I've heard kind of the walking away calling and then run back to that tree or jump a couple trees further up and stuff like that.
Yeah,
If a bird's hung up like 150 yards or something, like Joe Ham talked about that last week. But I haven't heard
yeah,
necessarily about this kind of like what you're calling yo-yo calling, where you're kind of working to and from the gobbler at different angles until he breaks and then gets set up. I got a couple different questions with that because that could have potentially helped me out this morning with this one bird. Because when I struck him, he got super hot for about 10 minutes, and he'd come up out of that drainage to a little secondary point right below me, and he just drift back down and keep gobbling. He'd come back up, gobble gobble gobble, and then drop back down and just kind of drift back and forth until finally he just drift down a little bit further. And I reposition on him. By the time I reposition on him, he either left the bottom or he just completely just got disinterested. Anyway, so first off, when doing that calling sequence, or yo-yo calling as we're going to describe it here, is there a specific distance of like how close or how far that bird could be away in order for it to work? Like, is that something that you would work on a bird at 150 yards if he's hung up? Or is that more so for like that 200 to 400 yard bird? Like, explain when you would implement that necessarily.
yeah. I mean, if he's within that 100, if he's under 150 yards, it's kind of tough unless you got a real good, unless he's just stuck in one spot at 150 yards, and you can just tell he's not giving up that ground. And you can, if you got cover, I've done it that way sometimes where I've worked to him and then I've worked off, like if I've worked directly toward him, and you want to sound like, I want to sound like I'm really interested. Like when I'm working my way toward him, I'm yelping, I'm clucking, I'm doing a lot of calling. And basically, I like to use it on those that are 200 to 300 to 400 to even further. I've done it on birds that have been half a mile away. And I'll cut the distance to them, half the distance, and get, or even closer, get within, 300 or 400 yards of that bird, and then work back off on a different ridge or, back at a different angle. I don't like to just go from, it doesn't seem to work if you work directly to them and then you just hard peel off right or left. It seems to work best when you kind of, go down a ridge side and then you peel back, switch back at an angle away from you. So, that's one of the things, because it basically, I mean, I learned it from an old turkey hunter that I ran into in the woods up there, just chance back years and years ago. And he said he came out and he had a bird on his shoulders. How'd you kill that bird? He's like, oh, I walked the dog on it. And basically that's just a yo-yo term. That's what he called it. And I called it yo-yo calling. So that's where I got it from. So it's not really my idea, but he told me what he done up in these ridges, up in these big mountains. Cause a lot of times those gobblers will get on a ridge point and they'll just kind of circle it, and they're kind of, the hens kind of work the same way. They kind of work up and down. They kind of zigzag. So you're kind of already mimicking kind of their kind of patterns. So, it's just a trick that when you got one out there and he's just not budging off of that ground, a lot of times that can really work in this time period, especially once you get a little bit of leaf cover. You can push the envelope a little bit more. You can get a little closer, and sometimes if those birds are just stuck to their ground, a lot of times that yo-yo calling will just, it'll get them off of that. The two birds in 2 days that came into that I don't think would have came in any other way.
Yeah, so I want you to walk through this scenario with the bird this morning. I know you were texting me, you smoked a tree, unfortunately, but explain. I want you to walk through the scenario of like how the bird was set up. How was that gobbler set up on his like terrain, his topography, whatever, and then explain like your path, like how you were working, how far the bird was, but also your actual calling sequence. Like what were you actually using in order to imitate an interested hen that then became disinterested, kind of walking back off and back towards him, if you would.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was walking on an old logging road, and I had the higher. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I had the higher ground. We were almost on even terrain. He was below me slightly on like 3 or 4 ridges over, and well, that's when I first struck him up. I I think I crow called to him, and he answered right back. And he was on some private land at that time. He was roosted right over a big, like a creek, and they had a field in front of it. And then he was right on the line of the private, and the big, public land was right behind him. And the way it's set up was it's almost like a big hand, like it was almost like a topo hub, and he was at the far end, and I was way over here. And these were not like steep ridges; they're kind of rolling, so it wasn't hard terrain. It wouldn't really, anything. You'd have to be careful moving in that kind of terrain, because there's sight distances were really, really long. So I got within about 400 yards of him, and I didn't think that I thought this is close enough. I've gained a little higher elevation on him. I got on the same ridge that he was on, and I played with him for probably 25 minutes, and I don't think he ever moved a peg. I think he was, in fact, I think he might have been still in the tree at that time. And he was basically just stationary, but he was gobbling. Like I said, he would take about 5 or 6 seconds between the time that I would project a call to him till he'd gobble back. And finally, after about 30 minutes of dealing with that, I said, he's just not gonna budge. Like 30 minutes, he's sitting in one place. Either he's got hens there with him, and I'm just gonna have to play the waiting game, or I can try something different. So I cut the distance in half. And when I was cutting the distance in half, I was just yelping at him, like, not when he gobbled. When I first started doing it, this is what I like to do. When they got, like, if I call and he answers me back, but he's got that delay. As soon as he is done gobbling, actually, I'm trying to cut him off as he's gobbling. I'm just cutting back at him and yelping real loud, as loud as I can. And then as I get closer, I get really quiet. But I'm working toward him, but I'm dialing my calling back as I go. So I sound really excited when I start out, but by the time I get that distance cut, I'm toning down my calling. And if I don't hear him break, when I've cut say half the distance, if he's still not breaking, I don't wait right there and wait for him to break. At that point in time, it's like, if you're not coming to me, I'm going back to where I came from. And at that point in time, I switched back on the ridge I was on and started going back at if he's at 12 o'clock, I'm going back, and I came from 6 o'clock. I'm going back toward 4 o'clock. So I just switched back down in the hollow that he was in, and worked my way that way, just clucking and purring and some soft yelping, just walking away from him. And I did that and probably went 150 yards. And when I got about 150 yards away, I did a sequence, and I could hear him gobbling, but I didn't slow down. I didn't wait to listen for him. I just walked the 150 yards and just stopped. And when I stopped, he was right where I just was. So where I just left from, he had already cut that distance. And so I just snuck up on the top of the hill, the ridge there. I had to gain elevation, probably 20 feet in elevation, and got to where I could look down the ridge. And I saw him coming, and he was about 60 yards. And he flipped the ridge on the other side of the ridge from me, and he worked his way up, gobbling the whole way. But he ended up looping around behind me. And it's just one of those matters that I couldn't get as good. I couldn't get as in the location I really need to be in. So he looped around behind me, and I just had a weird angle, having to shoot behind me basically, and just center punched a maple tree at 10 yards in front of him. So but that worked, and it worked. The day before it worked the same thing, or the weekend before, that Monday before had the same exact almost thing happened. So that it worked both times, and I just didn't seal the deal on either one of them. But that's how that scenario.
I will be implementing this in the morning because I'm going back in for 3 days in a row in this one bird. And
Yeah.
if he, I am implementing this in the morning, 100%, because he's a star. I can't listen. I saw him. I'm not gonna get. We're gonna talk about Thursday, but he heard me walk. Oh man, I'm so flustered. I should have stopped sooner. I didn't bust the bird, but man, yesterday morning when I was hunting that spot, he was roosting 200 yards from me. He got down. He was a ridge over from me. He was roosting on the side of the ridge. He got down that bottom, so 2 bottoms over. I swung up, cut across the first bottom between me and him, the ridge that he was roost off the back side of. Got on that ridge and started paralleling down to kind of get position on top of that ridge so I could set up and call. I was looking at one tree that was right next to me. I'm like, no, I'm going to get to this next tree about 20 yards ahead. As I'm walking up, I'm right almost on the crest of the ridge, and he'd gone silent. And, I'm kind of walking, trying to be quiet, but, you can still hear me walking the leaves. And next thing I know, I just catch movement down the ridge and I freeze. And I see him come up out of that bottom. He gets right on top of the ridge. He's maybe 80 yards from me, 70, 80 yards from me. And I just freeze. And I'm in some pines and stuff, kind of high stem count, but good sized pines, 9, 10, 15 inch diameter trees. And I freeze, and he looks up in my direction and gobbles right at me. Okay. And there's nothing between me and him. And he gobbles right at me, and I'm my right leg starts, just jumping. And I'm he's about to bust me. And I'm the second he gets behind some trees, I'm just sitting on the ground. I sit down. He gets behind some trees. I sit down, scratching the leaves, do some soft clucks. And he just goes quiet, and I hear him. He goes back over the ridge, swings next to me at probably maybe 40 yards, and I could hear him spitting. I couldn't hear him. For some reason, I couldn't hear him drumming. But Shane, I don't know if you've ran into this situation. When that gobbler, there's nothing between me and him, and he gobbles at me. It was not as nearly as loud as I thought that bird should be at that distance. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Andrews had a bird. He killed a bird on us in public maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and he was soft gobbling or quiet gobbling. He was 50 yards from me, and he'd gobble, and you're what's wrong with that bird?
Yeah.
And have you ever experienced something like that where they're gobbling and they're the intensity is there, they're excited, but they're not going full volume on their gobbles?
Yeah, I've seen them, especially on the management areas. They get a lot of high pressure. They'll quieten their gobble down. Yeah, I killed one. It wasn't last year, but I think it's the year before, and he was muffling his gobbles. If I wouldn't have been paying attention, I probably would have never known that he was closing the distance. But I was just really tuned into what he was doing. But yeah, he was doing the same thing. And the funny thing is, I actually watched him do it. He instead of having the head back, he was doing it at ground level. He would head down and gobble off to the side. Instead of having that head up and gobbling straight forward, he was almost tucking his head down and gobbling. And then he would look up and he would gobble, but it didn't have near the volume, And I think he had just been pressured so much, and it was that area that he was in he had probably gotten called to a lot and just didn't want to identify himself. Either that or he got beaten up a lot, one or the other. So
yeah,
I've had this,
Yeah, I ended up that bird when he swung by me, he got down that one bottom where I found him again today, and he gobbled one more time at me when I called to him, and then I repositioned, got down there. I'm going to get to right where he came up on the ridge, and I'm going to sit right there and try to call him back up to that spot. And I did that. He would respond to my calling, but he's just working straight away right up that bottom. And anyway, but it was one of those things that now, looking back at it, the yo-yoing, that calling style, it seems like it's I'm almost to say the complete opposite of subtle calling. You're sounding like an excited hen, but then you're kind of going a little more subtle on when you're kind of working away from you lost interest in them.
Yeah.
and I can see how that could work in a lot of situations, especially whether you have topography or vegetation to kind of play with it. Play with, like I bet you it'd be probably super hard to do in big river bottoms that's wide open with no cover. But any place that has some rolling hills, or if it's flat land, but you have some good understory, I feel like you could really work well with that in that kind of position.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. It's all dependent on your terrain and your habitat, what you got to work with. Because a lot of times it doesn't. I've had it where I've had to do it 3 or 4 times. Like I've just had to zigzag around the bird and almost do a not a 360 but a 180 before I would finally get him to break away. But eventually, I mean, it's worked more than it's not, and so I mean, it's not worked every time, but it works enough that I like doing it, especially when they're in that position that they're just not they're just somewhat interested, But yeah, I like them where I don't have to do that though. I like to, I like them where I just got to move one time and he just pops up.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
no, you got to have every tool at your disposal, and that's just one of them that I've kind of learned in those mountains that you can get by with that a lot better. But like you said, this time of year, if you're in the river bottom, you ain't got creek bottoms, or you're hunting something like that, yeah, it's probably going to be a tricky situation to try to do that.
Let me ask you this: when it comes to this calling style, again, it seems like it's something that would work really well, especially on potentially pressured birds. That's kind of held up in a spot, and again, just imitate a hen that's in the area, but potentially looking to be bred. When it comes to the setup, or like the setup as in doing the yo-yo, are you ever worried? I'm sure it's happened to you in the past. As long as you turkey hunted, I'm sure it's happened. Are you ever worried about that bird just going silent on you and cutting the distance and then busting you before like you actually set up or like know he's there?
Oh yeah, no, I've had them. Yeah, I mean, I've had them when you're doing the walk to them, like that gets them fired up, and he just silent, or you misjudge where he's at. I've had that happen. So when that's why when I'm working my way to him, um, while I'm being aggressive, I'm not just running to him. It's I stop and I listen, do my call, then move away. So yeah, you can't just when you want to implement it, you can't just haul off and go right to him, because a lot of times that's going to if he does say, well, she's coming, I'm coming too,
Yep.
that brain, and you're gonna end up busting that bird if you ain't careful. But yeah, I've had it happen, or I've had it where hens intercepted me. It flushed him out. I mean, it's not foolproof by any means. I've had other gobblers cut me off halfway. And flush the bird out. So it's been a bunch of different things happen. I remember one time I was doing it, I think 4 or 5 years ago, and I busted some deer. Like I didn't know they were bedded down on this ridge, and he was right. And I mean, and I didn't realize he had came up the ridge too. So he was on the opposite ridge, and again he went silent. He was coming, but he didn't. Again, he didn't let me know. And when I got to the top of the ridge and clucked, there was two or three of those like bedded right. I mean, I never saw them. They were 15 yards away, and boom, and next thing I know, I watch him pitch off that ridge, and he goes, half a mile away. So there's a lot of different things that can blow your plan up, but it's just part of it, I guess.
So I want to talk to you a little bit more about the calling aspect. So when you're working your way towards that bird on the initial part of this movement, the yo-yo going towards the turkey, directly towards the turkey, and cutting the distance, you're doing mostly yelps. Are you cutting? I mean, is it this based off the temperature of the bird, or is it, I know you said like you're going to slowly kind of get quieter as you get going towards them. Oh, initially, are you kind of just starting with this loud yelps, or do you ever work in anything else in a more intense fashion?
Yeah, I like to start out like really aggressive. Like I said, if I can get him to gobble, and I've decided I'm going to make this move, if I can get him, I'll try to get him to gobble, so I know, hey, he's right here. Like I'll stand up, get ready to move, have everything ready, and as soon as I get him to gobble, and I'm going to make that move, I'm going to cut his gobble off with like a hard, long, cut and yelp. and pop pop pop, and then yep 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 yep, and then I'm gonna start moving. Like if he even if he doesn't gobble to that, then I'm gonna start cutting the distance. And I may do that. I may do some more yelping, like for the first 50, 40, 50 yards. But I'm trying to sound like a hen. You want to sound like that's a lot of people move through the woods and they move away from a bird, they move to the bird, and they're calling along the way, but they're not sounding like a hen would sound in the woods walking. A hen's not gonna, you're not gonna hear a hen yelp at this spot and then 5 minutes later be 100 yards and yelp again. Like they don't move that away. That gobbler is going to be like, well, goodness, that like he's in his mind, he's not going to rationalize it, but it just doesn't sound natural that a hen would cover 100 yards in 5 minutes. They're slow as Christmas. So you got to do it at their pace. Like I think that's a lot of people's issue when they're walking through the woods and they're calling is they're not at the pace a turkey walks. So it's like you got to go really slow. So it may take me 30 minutes to cut that distance. Like the bird today, it took me, I think it was 40 minutes. I went 100 yards, and it was just because I was just working through the woods, and as I went along, I was just clucking and purring. After I had gotten that initial response, it was just I was clucking and purring and soft yelping all the way there. And when I got there, I just did a little more aggressive yelp, not super aggressive, but just like, hey, I'm here, like I met you halfway. And he responded, and then he shut up. I didn't hear anything else. And then, it seemed like I think I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, and he gobbled almost in the same exact place. I'm like, well, now I gotta boogie back the other way at that point in time. So, and that's what that just moving away, clucking, yelping, just light yelping, purring, sound like a hen feeding through the woods by herself. That's what did it. So,
Shane, I've got to ask. I know you like chasing some big deer. What is the difference between like specifically trying to target individual bucks versus turkey hunting? Like, what do you like about each one, and where do they kind of stand with you? As in, not necessarily a preference, but like what's the benefit of each one, or what's your favorite thing about each one? And how does somebody that goes from being like a highly focused deer hunter, which we have a lot of those that listen to the podcast, maybe show them, maybe what turkey hunting has to offer from like an excitement level, and kind of what do you get out of it?
oh man, I always say that deer hunting has my mind, but turkey hunting has my soul. Like um, there's something that connects me to the turkey a lot more than connects me to the deer. I feel like if I kill a big buck, I feel more like I've accomplished a bigger goal by doing that. But um, it seems like turkey hunting just feels that emotional, um, uh, I guess, emotional cup inside of me that deer hunting just doesn't really do. So that's the best way I would say that I look at it. Um, it's turkey hunting is so interactive. If you're not having luck, it's you're not brokenhearted about it. Like there's tomorrow and there's more birds and there's the opportunity could be on this ridge right next to you. You just don't know. It's that you're never really out of the game, even though you feel like you are sometimes. And when you're a new turkey hunter, it can play with your emotions because let's say you've gotten a little bit of success and then it goes away, you don't have success. It can that's where you lose that emotional connection to it, that you got to just keep pushing forward. So you got to have the same persistence that you do chasing a big mature buck that you do with chasing turkeys. It's got to be that same persistence because to me that it's getting that emotional connection to the bird that I don't have to the deer. The deer are more like a cat and mouse game. Whereas the turkey is like, I'm actively trying to do something to kill this turkey. I'm in a game, with this turkey, trying to convince him that I'm another turkey. Whereas with a deer, I'm trying to put myself in the path of that buck. It's a strategy. And so if you can do both, I mean, man, it helps you on both ends. Like my deer hunting helps my turkey hunting. My turkey hunting, vice versa, relates to my deer hunting because it teaches me the patience, the understanding of how animals work, and how they move through the woods and how they interact with each other. So there's so many benefits to doing both, but you have to have the same persistence that you apply to deer hunting. If you're just a deer hunter and you want to get into turkey hunting, a lot of people go out and have initial success and then they don't. You have to have that same persistence, because I promise you, if you get 5-6 years into the game, into the turkey hunting, and you've kept that persistence, there's a curve in your learning where it becomes easier and you gain that respect for the animal and that understanding of what he's doing. And sometimes it takes hunting with other people to really, to have that click and watching what they're doing. And when you can go out and do it on your own consistently, that's when you'll get that emotional connection to that bird that'll make you want to keep doing this years and years and years. So I wouldn't be deer hunting if it wouldn't been for turkey hunting. I would have had no interest in it. So it got me into the sport, and it's kept my emotional cup full, just because there's something special about it. It's just different. Just that interactivity that you just don't get with deer hunting.
No, I completely agree. And also, one thing about turkey hunting, which, I mean, there's a lot of frustrating moments in deer hunting. Deer busts you, you put all this time and effort in, and, when the moment happens, you're not able to execute a shot or you miss or whatever, and that might be your only opportunity. The good thing about turkey hunting, and I will say this, you got to take this with a grain of salt, like Shane, like where we live in Alabama, okay? We have pretty decent turkey numbers, okay? Someone that might live in Arkansas or like one of these states that aren't doing super hot, South Carolina is another one I just saw where they're talking about even shortening their season up even more so because of turkey numbers. It's a little bit, I guess, more challenging, instead of going out and hearing, 4 or 5 birds a morning, on a good morning, or maybe even more than that, they may only hear 4 or 5 birds the whole season. But the thing about turkey hunting that I personally have enjoyed more and more the last couple of years is the cat and mouse, and with a bird that has a brain this, everybody says the size of a pea. I've never cut a turkey's head open to see exactly how big the brain is, but it's not very big. How I'm not even going to say intuition, but their survival instincts and the way a gobbler, especially a mature gobbler, will work landscapes, terrain, habitat, you think he's outsmarting you, and maybe you could look at it that way, but just with him living on the landscape, whether he's 2 years old or 5 years old, how he will do things in a very specific way that will drive you crazy. Like the bird I'm hunting right now. Like if I kill this, I'm telling you, if I kill this turkey tomorrow or sometime this season, he's the only gobbler I found in this whole area. Okay, there's some jakes there, but he's the only longbird I've seen in this one area. If I kill this bird, I will be as proud about this turkey. I don't know. He may have 1.5-inch spurs. He might have 7/8-inch spurs. I don't know, but he's a big turkey. And if I kill this bird, I will be as proud of this turkey as any buck I probably have ever killed. Okay. Because he's gotten under my skin, and it is personal now. And to me, that's kind of the fun aspect. Like I think we all enjoy, those quick hunts. You get like a 30-minute hunt. Bird does the gobbler does everything right, and you do everything right, and it's a quick 30-minute hunt. That's fun. But the cat and mouse, where you're working an area, and especially if it's an area like this area I'm hunting, it's got decent turkey numbers, but for whatever reason, like the area that I'm in, there's not a ton of gobblers this year, where last year there was a few in there. And to be able to go kill a turkey like this, which I know there's other guys hunting in this area. I found boot tracks there the first day I got there, where someone had been in there previously before me. And, the turkey's educated, but when you could actually go in and have success on a bird, especially like that, a turkey that's had pressure, to me, it's a accomplishment that I hold in high regards. It's not necessarily like you said, like, you kill a 5.5 year old buck, whether he's 110 inches or he's 150 inches, there's something special about that, and the wariness of a big buck. But to be able to go, especially on public land or even like on a high pressure hunting club, like Andrew's Hunting Club, let me tell you, probably has the most educated turkeys I've ever like experienced. Okay. And I've hunted a bunch of public. These turkeys on that place, they either none of them are at the point of being ready to be killed and ready to die, or they are just at the point of education where they've been bumped so many times by not just even us but other hunters on the place, that they may gobble a few times on the roost, but when they hit the ground, it takes everything in their body for you to be able to pull a gobble out. But it brings back to the whole yo-yo aspect. Because again, Andrew's not in this conversation. He might join us a little bit later, but probably not. I think he might miss this episode. I think that would work extremely well in his club because those birds are pretty tight-lipped. But if you can get one gobbling right off the roost like this, and right when he hits the ground, be able to work him like that, because there's a lot of hens in the area, and I think especially as we get another 5, 6, 7 days and maybe have a few more hens going to nest, it may work out a little bit even better for us. But I feel like that's where that could really play in, kind of yo-yo, just kind of hit my mind. But going back to like the emotional aspect of turkey hunting, I agree with that. I mean, and it's one of those things like, I think everybody's turkey hunting or entry into turkey hunting story is a little bit different. Like I had an uncle that turkey hunted, and it was a very casual turkey hunter. We hunted our little family farm a few times. We got on some birds. I never killed one down there. He killed one bird down there probably 11 years ago. His last turkey he's killed down there. Since then, he's kind of got out of turkey hunting because of his work. Springtime's a real busy time, and he works about 6, almost 7 days a week, and has 3 kids. So he doesn't really have time to turkey hunt right now. But I never had like a die-hard, passionate turkey hunter. Like the first guy I ever met that was a die-hard turkey hunter was Andrew when I first met him, like 7, almost 8 years ago. And it was like a different perspective versus like what we did turkey hunting. Like we would go try to strike one on the roost, but more than likely than not, we were just setting up a decoy. If we couldn't kill him right off the roost, we'd go sit in a food plot with a decoy, like one of those cheap foam decoys. They look terrible now compared to everything else on the market. And, we would just sit there and blind call and truly just not have success. And it really wasn't fun either, to be 100% honest. There wasn't any of that cat and mouse game. It was more like you're deer hunting for turkeys, which is not a super fun way to turkey hunt. It can be effective in some areas, but it's not what turkey hunting is all about, like the interaction standpoint. And I think my passion for turkey hunting happened once I started hunting public land and had more opportunities, just because you had more land to hunt, really more opportunities to fail and bumped a bunch of birds, missed a bunch of birds, the whole 9 yards. And that kind of fueled me more so of like those hard lessons learned, kind of getting back to what we get messages all the time, is those hard lessons learned and like how somebody can kind of work past some of those. And it's not necessarily like deer hunting. Like I think deer hunting, you can take a lot of advice from somebody and kind of go out there and maybe not have to make every mistake that you would have made if you're on your own. You can kind of learn some stuff from some guys in order to kind of speed that along. But I feel like turkey hunting, every turkey's so different. Every deer's so different too. But I feel like turkey hunting, it's truly one of those things, like you can take advice from somebody about how not to make mistakes, but I promise you it won't click until you make that mistake 4, 5, 6 times and you're like, I'm not going to do this again. And then you have to make a mental note of, I'm not doing this again. I'm going to handle this situation a little bit different and try to kill that turkey.
Yeah, it's a constant learning from your mistakes and relearning from them. It really is. And no matter what anybody tells you, hey, be patient, don't do that. Every you know every episode that you have with that gobbler, or any gobbler, is going to be different. So you got to, you're constantly trying to not make 16 different mistakes. Like it literally is just you're learning on the fly. That's the best way to learn it. And sure, take a lot of advice from people. Like I take these, like the yo-yo thing, somebody taught me that, the patience, the little scratching the leaves, all these little parts that you put together Um, those are the things that you can apply every time you go out. But the lesson, like the hard lessons, are just, you know, gosh, it those are just things you just have to learn there in the field. You know, like I can't do that anymore. I can't rush in there. I can't call out. I can't do this. You know, like those are things you just have to. You have to. It doesn't matter how somebody tells you to do it until you've crashed and burned 20 times. You're not going to learn. You know, because it's just our want to do things the way we want to do them that takes over our common sense sometimes. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I I think this is where I don't think you have to be. And we talked about this. Had guests on the podcast talk about this. Like, I don't think you have to be a master caller or anything like that. But I think you need to be persistent enough, especially with not just a friction call, like a box call or a slate call or something like that, a pot call, but also being at least well versed enough to be able to run a diaphragm call to be able to handle different situations. Because I know guys that specifically only use friction calls, and that's fine until that bird is like not necessarily where he can see you, but if he's super close, you got to pick. Or like, if I need to make a call, am I put my gun down in order to try to make my call, or I'm just going to shut up and just kind of see how everything works out.
Yeah.
Or also, if you are kind of moving on a bird, it's so much easier to run a mouth call moving on a bird, especially if you get your gun in your hand or even on a sling, versus trying to run a friction call a lot of times. So I think that's a huge part as well. And I always say this, like, I'm not a great caller at all. But it's like you got to figure out like what you have confidence with, and whether it's a box call. Because I personally, dude, I've never had success with a box call, and I think it's this person because I don't have confidence with it. And I know guys like our buddy Wayne Lackey, he loves a box call because he says a lot of guys have moved to just mouth calls or maybe a pot call, and they don't use box calls anymore, and he has a lot of success with them. I typically don't have a lot of success with the box call, but like with a crystal slate or a crystal pot call and a mouth call, I feel confident with in like a wing bone. But it's like you got to be, you got to go through enough situations, I feel like, in order to fail to figure out what did I do wrong. And always, like we talked about with some of your episodes as well and other deer episodes, asking yourself why. Like, why did I not have success? Why did this potentially not work out? What was the turkey doing, or what did I think the turkey was doing? What did I do that potentially messed up the situation? And also, when you kill a bird, ask yourself why. Like, how did this come together? Was it just that turkey was ready to die? What was my calling sequence like? What was my setup like? Because that's one of the biggest things. Like, I screwed up my setup the first day I hunted with you, opening day of public land season. Had a bird at 30 yards spitting and drumming. I couldn't shoot the thing. He was right over the lip of the ridge. I was set up on one side, and he didn't want to pop up. His hen popped up, and she just kind of scratched around, went back over to the other side, and there was no opportunity for me because I couldn't really stand up or get on my knees in order to try to shoot the bird. So, and that happened to Andrew as well this morning, hunting some public knife edge ridge. You gotta pick your battle, or you can be sitting right at the top and kind of sky on yourself, especially when the bird's 100 yards away, or you can sit on the back side of it and just pray that he comes over the top. And as Andrew will talk about on Thursday's episode, he didn't want to come over the top and got to about 25, 30 yards and spitting, drumming, gobbling the whole 9 yards, but would not crest it in order for the shot to happen. So, I think your setup is massive. I think your setup may be almost more important than your calling. I don't know what your take would be.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like it doesn't matter how good you sound if you're not set up where you could kill that bird. How good you sound don't matter, And I think setup is one of those things that it is learned by failing, or learned by succeeding. Like and I did it Monday. I did the same thing. I didn't set up. I didn't set up right. I did it today. I wasn't today. Was more of I couldn't set up right. And sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you can't get things perfect. And things just go awry. But it's paying attention to where you're at relative to where the gobbler is, and then like the one thing that I try to do, and when I do it, I seem to be way more successful deer hunting and turkey hunting. If I come into a place and I've got a bird working, if I just sit down and I don't pay attention to things, I'm just trying to rush to get to a spot, I don't feel confident at all. But if I can sit and assess things and almost visualize where that turkey is going to come from, is he going to come right up here? Like I can almost see it in my mind, and then I can visualize where I need to be sitting, you know. And you have to learn to do that like really quickly with turkey hunting, because it can be a matter of you got 30 seconds to set up, you know. So, but it's when I don't do that, when I don't sit there and look like, you know, the bird's here, look at, you know, sometimes I pull up my Onyx or my, you know, Spartan Forge or whatever, my LiDAR, and look at the little nuances on the terrain and look at the habitat. And it may take me 15 or 20 seconds to do that. Say that, you know, I think he's going to avoid this little ditch, these rocks right here. You know, how's he going to move in? And then set up based off of that. Because that's where, when I don't do that, I just don't feel confident. That's when I don't seem to be able to I guess close the deal, you know. And that setup calling has really ever caused me to not kill a bird. It's always been, I wasn't where that gobbler wanted to be or would go. I didn't put myself in that path. And that's usually 99.9% of the time. If you're not successful on a turkey, it's because you weren't in a position that bird wanted to go, or you weren't in a position where that bird wanted to go that you could kill him at.
Shane, I'm going to ask. This is me being a little selfish here, asking a question that would pertain to me. You got any tips on killing turkeys that like to get down these little steep creek bottoms? Just yo-yo them, or you got anything else?
A steep, and they're in a steep creek bottom.
Not as steep as that one that you had all those birds in when you and me were hunting, but like, you know, a little more gradual than that. But, you know, you got a bottom where it might drop 40, 50, 60 feet down into.
Right down into it.
And it's like, and it's like a flat, you got like it's kind of like that creek bottom kind of flattens out. It's a perfect spot, good visual. Like he can see a lot from down there. But that 2 days in a row, that bird has gone to that bottom and he's stayed down in that bottom in this big flat where you get, it's almost like a little hub where you got, you know, two different drain, or the big creek drainage goes through and then another big drainage drops down. And it kind of makes a triangle right there. And he just wants to stay in that general little area.
Yeah, and I've run into that. Me and Michael actually had one that was doing that last weekend when I hunted with Michael Pike. He was in the same thing, like a big steep V drainage, but it's kind of flat. And he can get in there and he can see all the way up and he can see all the way out, and the high ground's above him. But he could cast his gobbles up in there and it would just reverberate everywhere. You know, so I think that's why he loved that spot. And the only reason we didn't kill that bird is we couldn't come around the way I wanted to. I normally, on that situation, I like to come around, like if the drainage is in, it's got the ridges are coming down. I like to get not on the bottom, but like 1/3 of the way up and come around the side of the ridge and get right on that point, like where I can see almost up in the drainage, but he can't see around that bend, and just try to call from that, because he's kind of in a disadvantaged position right there. And from that point, at that stage, if he's in that drainage, you can do the yo-yo calling because you can stay hid behind that ridge. You can come there and kind of cast your calls off toward him. And if he's just walking back and forth in that thing, eventually, if you do that enough, you just kind of bounce to him enough right there from that same place. I've killed several like that. Just doing that same thing. Like I just stay behind the ridge and I get 1/3 of the way up, and where I can see in that drainage. If I can see him, even better. But if I can hear him, if I can't see him, at least I know he's in there. And then I'll just bounce back and forth, you know, until I eventually just drag him out of there, you know.
Glad you brought that up because that would work in this spot. That gives me an idea for tomorrow if I can't kill him off the roost, which he switched. I don't know where he roosted this morning because I sat up really to try to kill him when he flew down from the roost this morning, and he wasn't in those trees this morning. So I think he was roosted further up that drainage instead of the little bench where he had roosted the day before.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how that bottom shakes. It's almost like, if you looked at it, it's almost like a kind of, you know, looks like kind of a banana, kind of curls around the big ridge right there, and then that next drainage comes up, and he seems like he want to be in the back portion of that flat before it goes up a lot steeper right there. And I might have to try that tomorrow. So that's a really good point. Shane, real quick, almost time to wrap up, but I want to ask you. You were talking to us about this a little while back. I think you just made an announcement on it. You're now offering some e-scouting for individuals that want to maybe, especially like listeners who've heard you on the podcast a whole bunch and maybe want to kind of pick your brain about a property or something like that. You kind of will help them out a little bit on it and help them kind of figure out what they need to do on a property, whether it's, maybe some public land, some private land, however. So talk to me a little bit about that. Kind of what do you have going on there?
Yeah, I've kind of started a little side business, this whitetail strategies and mapping. So it's basically just an e-scouting service. I've got about 15 or 20 clients right now that I'm doing it for. So I'm taking on, I'm going to keep doing it through the summer. But I'll basically break down properties as I would hunt them. So I'm looking at it from my point of view, how I like to hunt, and I do everything from, good camera locations during the summer, routing your deer travel funnels, everything. I break it down. Like I said, just like if I was going to walk onto a new piece of property, I'm gonna put all that in a folder, pins. If you use Spartan Forge, you use Onyx, whatever mapping app that you're using, I'll be glad to work with you on it. But yeah, it just breaks down as much property as I can for the individual that's wanting it. If you got a hunting club, if you've got private land, public land, whatever you want to do, I can handle all of it. So, and then as we go along, I'm also offering like a scouting e-scouting service as well. So when you're out there putting boots on the ground, you reach back out to me, pin what you're looking at, and I'll work with you to kind of read that. We'll put that in a folder and help you out as you get back, directly into hunting. So it's something I've really enjoyed doing. So I'm offering that service. So if you just look up November Warrior Outdoors or Shane Parker on Facebook, you'll see the whitetail strategies and mapping on there, and you can just reach out to me and I'll be glad to help you out.
Yeah, and I will personally say this, guy. Shane is probably one of the best in the business when it comes to e-scouting. I've personally seen it, gone out and hunted with him and seen how he breaks down stuff, and it's, not going to lie, dude, it's on a completely different level. So if any of you guys are interested in potentially having Shane kind of look at, especially like your hunting club, I mean, holy cow, your members in your hunting club won't have a chance at that point. You have some upset members when you start killing some big deer. Definitely reach out to Shane there. And again, like Shane said, you can reach out to him on November Warriors or November Warrior on social media, but also just look up Shane Parker and check that out. So Shane, as a point of wrapping up, is there any kind of final thoughts or anything, especially for maybe some newer turkey hunters or people that are trying to get out there and they're struggling to have some success? Any kind of final words of wisdom you may would have for them?
Man, it's just it's that patience and that persistence. That's really what has helped me more than anything, and that's what'll help you, is just patience and learning on the fly, learning by your mistakes, learning your successes, and don't let the successes be a judge of what of the future. And don't let your failures deter you. It's that persistence and that patience that'll get you where you need to be. If it takes 5 years, it takes 5 years, but you'll come to love this sport and just stick with it. That's all I can say, because it'll definitely pay off in the long run.
Awesome. Perfect. Shane, well, we appreciate you joining. Or I should say, I appreciate you joining me on this podcast. Hate that Andrew missed it because, again, a great conversation. But listeners, we'll be back on Thursday for a Thursday breakdown episode. Andrew will be on there. Give a little update on what his thoughts were with this interview and this discussion here. I appreciate everybody watching the podcast on YouTube. Appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. And appreciate everybody sharing the episodes with buddies. So, again, if you enjoy this episode and you have a buddy, or maybe it's yourself, or maybe you have a friend that's been kind of struggling, kind of handling different situations on whether it's public land, private land, wherever turkey hunting, maybe share this episode with them and see if they get a little success from it and can go out there and have a little more fun. Because it's always more fun when we have success in the woods, be able to kind of, take what you're actually hunting for. So other than that, guys, we appreciate you watching the podcast, appreciate you listening to the podcast, and we'll catch you back here on Thursday's episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast. And remember, y'all stay Southern.